Beyond Clean offers a creative look into the inner workings of the healthcare industry committed to getting it right. Every instrument, every time. Join us every week as we explore the hidden world of one of the most important aspects of safe surgical care. And now your hosts, Hank Balch and Justin Poulin.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Patrick Dotz, Division Director at Soliant Health. Patrick is a healthcare placement professional whose primary focus is contracting high-quality nursing, allied, and therapy professionals to hospital clients. Hank, I'm really excited for this one.
That's right, Justin. Reinforcements, ringers are, if you want to call them productivity pushers, whatever it is, when you have a need for a traveler and they show up at your door, it's for a pretty good reason. And often reasons that can be as diverse as the particular department that's calling them in. If it's a plugging a hole for an unexpected retirement or getting the department through a season of spiking surgical volume, these knights of the OR kingdom can spell the difference between service delivery and service disaster. And I could not be more excited to talk to Patrick today about how he places and connects these individuals with the facilities who need them the most.
Yeah, and I can only imagine how difficult it is to find good people. I mean, obviously, you know every day trying to find good people for the department, but then to find good people to send to other departments being your business, there's a lot of ins and outs of that. We'll get into a lot of it. When I was a nurse, when I first came out of school, before I had a family and kids and began to settle down, doing staff nursing was something I thought would be an awesome idea so that I could travel around, see different parts of the country. And regrettably, I never took that opportunity, but I know we'll get into what is that like and what should people consider if they wanted to become a travel technician as well. So I'm interested to hear his insight on that. I never pulled the trigger, but I'm sure that there are listeners out there who have thought the same thing I did. Wouldn't it be great to be able to go around and see the country a little bit and make a little money and have a nice career path that way?
Yeah, and even though this service is widely used by facilities and perioperative leaders around the country, there's a lot of departments out there that just don't know how to make the most of their own experience. How do we receive this traveler in a way that they're going to hit the ground running, for instance? So I think we're going to get a lot of that today from Patrick, both from the traveler's perspective, but then also from that higher level facility perspective as well.
All right. Well, we're going to be right back with Patrick Dotz, Division Director at Soliant Health. All right, joining us now, Patrick Dotz, Division Director at Soliant Health. Patrick, thanks for coming on Beyond Clean with Hank and myself.
Justin, Hank, my pleasure, guys. I'm excited to be here.
Why don't we just do an introduction so that all the listeners get to know a little bit about you and how you ended up in the world of staffing?
Oh, that's an awesome question. And as you and your listeners may or may not know, there is not a degree offered by any college I'm aware of that is healthcare recruiter. So it's definitely an interesting field to end up in. I actually grew up in a little town in Bowling Green, Ohio, and ended up going to school there. And I majored in sport management, which is basically just an emphasis on business with a sport background. So a lot of your law, finance management, and finance classes revolve around the world of sports business. And I never quite got my footing in that world. It was a world where you had to come out of college willing to take next to a low-paid internship if you wanted to break through, and realizing that just wasn't realistic for my expectations. I had to go into the general business route. And I started working for a company up in Akron, Ohio, and that's when I met my future wife, who turns out to be a South Georgia girl. And if you know anything about a South Georgia girl, they don't last in the North very long. The winters, it took about 4 winters, and we were engaged at the time. She said, "It's time to go." So there was a winter in Cleveland where we spent probably every morning, every night, shoveling snow and getting the snow off our car, and you don't see sunlight for about 3 months, that'll do anybody in. And so we actually packed up in the summer of 2011 and moved to Atlanta. She got a job at Georgia State, and I didn't have a job at all. And I was perfectly comfortable with that. I was confident in that I would find something. And sure enough, she referred me to a friend of hers who worked at Soliant Health. I didn't know anything about staffing. I didn't know anything about healthcare, recruitment. Here's what I liked is the company runs off about a 90% referral rate, which, as you guys probably know, anytime you're in an area where 90% of the people that work for you are referrals, that means that people are telling other people about how great the place is to work. And that really attracted me to the company. So believe it or not, I started off in a field that was not even remotely close to what I do now. I started in an area where I was staffing physical and occupational and speech therapists in the hospital setting. To be quite honest with you, I did that for the first 6 months on the job, and it was tough. It was 2011, early 2012. The economy was starting to slowly come out of the recession. Everybody felt that the healthcare industry was recession-proof. After that, our president likes to say it's now only recession-resistant because it was a tough time around there. And so it was a group that never really got its feet, planted, and it sort of became a war of attrition. The group was about 6 of us, and 5 of the people didn't do very well and didn't make it. And so here I was, this new young gun recruiter, having some success, but not much of a team around him to work with. And so they gave me the opportunity to move into the nursing and allied staffing space. And as I said before, we were just coming out of the recession. I looked at it as an opportunity to grow, and I just put my head down for a couple of years and really networked and tried to market myself to a lot of clients like Hank and others across the country, and build up a good book of business for myself. Eventually, they promoted me into a department manager role, leading a group of people. And about a year and a half into that, January 2016, I was promoted into the division director role there. And so now I'm not so much on the sales side. I'm much more on the management, strategic business planning, trying to multiply our business, get into new areas and new markets, and training our staff and having some input on our overall business, not just in the healthcare staffing space, but in the education staffing space as well.
Well,
so that's where I'm at now.
Hank and I are big fans of training and education, so you're hitting a couple of hot buttons right there, and I'm glad that you're part. To me, that's part of the quality management process, right? If the staff are educated and they have the proper training, that's what's going to lead to that 90% referral rate. But also, you mentioned before you even got into the industry, you had no idea what it was at all. And for our listeners who may not be aware as well, or might be in the same shoes you were before, and congrats for climbing the ladder so quickly, but before you got with Soliant, maybe just give them a background of what temp staffing or agency staffing looks like, specifically with sterile processing and the operating room.
Yeah, so it's still amazing to me to hear stories of people who work in healthcare who don't know what travel and temporary staffing is. It is such a growing industry over the last 3 to 4 years, but it's so what you have is you do have this. It's a weird niche. It's a weird Venn diagram of people who are not interested in permanent employment, and it's a mix of young people who have some experience, who are looking to travel, aren't really tied down by anything. It's some people who live in maybe areas that hospitals closed, or they might live in rural America where they can't make the financial means in their local area, and so they got to travel to find work. And then you have the you have some of these baby boomers that are getting to the end of their career, and maybe the kids are gone off to college, or maybe they're divorced and living alone, and they'd rather travel and see the country. So that's sort of the, I guess, what you would call supply side of it. It's these people who are not necessarily tied down to a one location. And then you have the other side of it where we're in an industry, as you guys might know, unemployment is, I think, at 4.3%, but healthcare unemployment's at 0.5% right now. And that maybe even be a little bit high. The demand in the operating room space over the last couple of years has just exploded. Whether you're an operating room nurse or an operating room technician, the Affordable Care Act really flooded the marketplace with people with more affordable insurance, although that word affordable is somewhat debated continuously week in and week out in our country. But nonetheless, we've seen this flood of people into the marketplace, and hospitals are continually having a hard time finding permanent staff, and then there's just times where they need temporary staff. People go out on leave for medical reasons, a couple of retirements, or somebody quits on them, or they're going through a EMR conversion. It's this demand for, we need somebody, but I don't need them permanently. I don't need them year-round. I just need somebody to stem the bleeding, if you will, for the next 13 weeks. And so you have this, and that's where we come in, as we play the middleman. We're the advocate for the candidate, and we're the advocate for the client to help find them temporary staffing, but also help that person that's looking for the job.
Hey, Patrick, I want to take you back to the EMR comment that you just made, because I think I saw that up close and personal at a number of facilities that went through those conversions and brought in a large number of temporary staffing to survive it. Are you still seeing a lot of that in the market, or has that wave already passed?
It does come and go in waves, and I always feel like the fall around this time is when it hits. And maybe you guys could educate me a little bit as to why on that, but we got hit with 2 EMRs that we're trying to staff here, one in Georgia and one in St. Louis, with 2 clients of ours that we're trying to help out with. And those are, having to help with just even one EMR keeps us busy, but having 2 at a time, obviously the hospital's utilizing several agencies, but anytime you get an EMR conversion, you're looking to help out as much as possible, because it's, we see a lot of people going to Epic, and that's a big one. So I don't know how, to your point, Hank, I don't know how many more hospitals are out there that can convert, that need to go to that, but they do seem to come in waves.
So walk us through a little bit of the type of market variation that you're seeing across the country. So as a leader who has hired in travelers and agency, I know one of the ways that I compete for those people is with a competitive wage, and there's hospitals across the street or across the state, perhaps across the country, who are offering higher wages. If it's in the wintertime and I need somebody down in Texas, maybe I can get the snowbirds. If it's in the middle of summer, it may be a different story. Yep. So what does that look like across the country? Do markets vary depending on the time of year even? How should we understand that?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's one of those things we are consistently trying to learn, and I'll give you a really good example just outside of the OR real quick is respiratory therapy. That is one that is, for the children's hospitals, you're just like every December, it's like clockwork. There's a pickup in census. There's a pickup in the need for temporary staffing, and we see that in the operating room too. In the wintertime, you see these cities that are close to ski resorts pick up in orthopedic trauma injuries. In the summertime, you see a pickup in the warmer states where they have a lot of swimming pools, and they get a lot of neuro and brain injuries. from people diving into swimming pools, believe it or not. It's crazy, neurospine injuries. I mean, it could just be little things like that that cause an uptick in the census. Believe it or not, this is going to blow your mind, but I talked to one of my travelers the other day who took a 3-week assignment out in Oregon because they were preparing for the eclipse census.
Wow.
Yep, you blew my mind.
Yep.
That's really funny.
So, I mean, it can just be for the littlest things here and there, but you definitely see some seasonal trends. I mean, Florida, there's a pickup in winter census, or the snowbirds come down, and there's definitely some trending there. There's just little unique pockets, and we really find those out best by just having conversations with folks like yourself who educate us about the area. But there's some other variations as well. There's, as you guys know, reimbursements are a huge part of the hospital funding system. And so we've seen a pickup in states that expanded Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. I've definitely seen a pickup in states like that. I'll give you a good example is Ohio. There was not a lot of need for temp staffing, but it's been robust in the last 3 years in the state of Ohio. And it's the little things like that could just change the wind. It could be the eclipse, or it could be big things like funding. There's definitely variations in the market and seasonality as well. But to your point, Hank, hospitals have to understand, and travelers have to understand that that's going to affect the bill rate or the pay rate. If you're located up in northern Maine and you need an operating room nurse and it's January, I'm going to have a hard time finding somebody that wants to go up to northern Maine in the middle of January.
It's so funny because you don't know this, Patrick, but I'm from almost northern Maine. I'm from Bangor. So you're talking about the county, and I know exactly where you're trying to staff.
Yeah, I've done some work in Ellsworth, if you know the hospital there.
I do. My aunt is a general physician there. That's really funny.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll be up that way. I'm taking
Small
a vacation
world.
up there. I'm heading to Acadia for the first time in my life, so I'm going to be up there in about a month.
Oh, you're going to love it. That's the right time of year to go with all the leaves. I grew up about an hour from there. But listen, we're going to be right back after a short break with Patrick Dotz from Soliant Health. And we'll be talking about best practices that managers can utilize when considering agency staffing for their department. So we'll be right back after a quick break. We're back with Patrick Dotz, Division Director at Soliant Health. And now we're going to talk about best practices that managers and supervisors, healthcare leaders can utilize when looking to agency staffing. And it definitely blew my mind when you mentioned the readiness for the eclipse preparation. You figure the holidays, that's a tough time for everybody. You want to give staff off and let them be with their families as much as possible, quality of life, etc. So I can see where agency staffing comes in there, but the eclipse, wow, what an impact. Why don't you tell us, Patrick, what department leaders and facility leaders should be looking for when they're partnering with a staffing company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'm going to put two things at 1A and 1B here. And at 1A, I'm going to put just the ability to fill a position is obviously important. I mean, you could be the most trustworthy, nicest, communicative person in the world, but Hank has no use for me if I can't provide him staff when it comes to this regard. So I think first and foremost, just the ability to provide not just adequate staff, but quality staff. And second, what I would put 1B there is just trust. Obviously that takes a little bit of time to build up. And for us, I really preach to our people of under promise, over deliver. And, build trust by being honest. I think some of my best relationships are built on times of when we actually fail. And I can't think of the business principle, but there's a strong theory around you actually create your best customers in times of when you actually fail them. And it's your response that actually brings loyalty. And for me, it's always look for a company that if they screw up, they tell you it's our fault and we screwed up. And they apologize for it. They don't make excuses. And they come to the table with a solution. I think if you're able to find somebody who is just that you can trust to say, "Yep, we bungled this one, and here's how we're going to solve it." I think that's probably one of the most beneficial things that you can look for in a staffing agency, and everything else. Communication is obviously important. Having an open line to each other. But to me, the trust and the ability to provide quality staff is the two way above everything else.
So let's say I'm in, and I'm not, but let's say I'm in Hank's position and I need staffing for our department and we're going to get ready to look at that. Maybe the eclipse is coming. How should the department prepare to receive the agency technician to make sure that they're successful? Because they're obviously going to spend money to have that position filled. And the last thing they want to do is bring somebody in, I would think anyway, bring somebody in from agency and not set that person up to get value from that financial commitment for the organization.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually probably one of the biggest mistakes that people in our office and just any office make when they're new is they don't have their clients set the expectation on the interview. It really does start with the phone interview, and it's not necessarily when they get there, because if you don't set expectations on the phone interview, they may be taken by surprise when they get there by something. And the big trap I always tell somebody in our office is they get excited when their candidate has been offered a job and they say, "Wow," and they didn't even interview. And I say, "Stop, talk to the client, get them on the phone," because that is a disaster waiting to happen. And because to me, and Hank did a great job at this, is just telling them what to expect, and setting your expectations to ensure that they perform up to your standards. What the shift is going to be, what the orientation looks like, what the attitude of the staff is, what are you going to require them on all the way down to how does your time card get processed? What are some good places to live in the area? I think, to me, just educating the person that you are bringing into your home on what the expectations are is very important from the phone area. And then the second is when they get there, reiterating those expectations again. The last thing you want to do is have to coach somebody throughout the entire assignment because you didn't do those two things. And it makes it a lot easier for us as an agency when they're not meeting those expectations. And Hank calls me up and says, "Hey, we talked about this on the interview. We talked about this on the first day. They're just not getting it." And that really gives us the leverage and the momentum to go into that conversation and say, they've talked about this. You've talked about this with them. This shouldn't come as a surprise. We need to fix this, or we need to be talking about somewhere else. And to me, that's the number one thing, is just setting expectations on the interview and then resetting them again when you get there. Because to your point, you're paying a premium. And I tell people all the time, I tell clients, you're paying a premium for our services, and it's not something Soliant will or any staffing agency should apologize for. But at the same time, if I'm the client, I want premium in return. And so that to me is just an expectation. And so if you're going to pay premium, you shouldn't expect to have to orient them for 3 weeks. So it's important to have a department orientation, but I would fully expect them to, assuming they know the ins and outs of the industry, to hit the ground running within a couple days.
Yeah, so let me jump in on that orientation train of thought then. And this is something that I have to plead guilty to your first comment about always understanding the importance of that phone interview process. We get the resume, we get even referrals oftentimes before we talk to these candidates as they come across our desk. And it's very tempting as a department leader under stress. I'm already critically staffed. The last thing I want to do is have to call multiple folks on the phone, to try to do an interview long distance from someone that the first time I'm actually going to see them in person is when they're walking in my door and saying, I'm here for 13 weeks. So, I have had to learn the hard way sometimes that those conversations on the front end are very important, not only for understanding how much does this person know, what's their reasons behind traveling, but then also, do they understand the cultural fit and the cultural context that they're going to be walking into? And even though I'm sure it's well known out there in the staffing industry, I think it's good as a leader to highlight, hey, the reason that we pull in agency travelers is often we are in a critical situation that there's no way that we can get out of this by ourselves. So you're walking into a storm, or at least a pretty large hole that we need to try to dig ourselves out of. So you're right. That pre-interview is important. I wanted to highlight, though, or I want to tag on to that orientation conversation, because in one sense, I agree with you. These are industry experienced experts. They're certified in their field. They should be able to hit the door and immediately provide some level of productivity. On the flip side, though, what kind of feedback have you gotten from your staff that you have placed to, I walked in the door and I didn't even know where the restroom was. They didn't even show me how to clock in and clock out, or where to find my scrubs. Is that a common occurrence, to walk in and have no welcome, just there's a department, get to work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hank. And it's sort of like you don't hear about the great burger you had at the local restaurant. You only hear about it when it's soggy and the meat's burnt, sort of thing. So if somebody starts an orientation at a hospital and they do a great job in orientation and they do a great job of getting the person up and running, you usually don't hear from that agency staff. They may say, yeah, everything went fine. But to your point, if things don't go well, you hear about it. So it feels like, I'm sure I hear more about the bad than I do the good, and I'm sure there's a lot more good happening out there. But you're right. It happens too much in my mind where they take for granted the adoption phase of bringing on an agency person and just welcoming them and making them feel at home in that first couple of days, and just explaining to them the basics of the job of how to clock in and out, where, as you said, where the bathroom is. Just little things like that make a huge difference. And it's one of those little things that we could definitely get better at as an agency, of educating our clients on that stuff as well. It is such an important part of the first impression is everything. I was talking to a client today who brought on an agency staff into their orientation, and on the flip side, she made a bad first impression in the orientation. She didn't have a very good attitude, wasn't very responsive, didn't interact with people. So right away, the hospital has already moved her into we got to watch this one category. So it can work the other way too, where you have this well-structured orientation, and you can isolate the people that may be a problem. So that's
a great point.
I think it's an important piece that we probably don't do as good of a job at as we should in our industry.
So that just highlights that the interview process and the onboarding process is not just from client to a traveler, but as soon as that traveler hits the door, they're also giving their first impression now to that hospital of, this is not only the kind of traveler I'm going to be, but this is the kind of agency that sent me. And if it is one of those situations where they hit the door and they have a bad attitude, they're already giving resistance, to just the welcome party, if you will, and the introductory instructions. Yeah, it's not a good sign, and it can be very scary as a leader who has gone through that. Looking at this person like, I'm paying a premium, I'm stuck with you now for about 13 weeks unless something crazy happens, and it's not starting good. So, no, that's a great point. In that vein, then, and this has been something that has been rattling around the back of my mind for about a year or so now. We have in the industry, to my knowledge, no current way for leaders and departments in perioperative services, surgical services, sterile processing to know the quality of the folks that we're getting, or in some senses even know the quality of the staffing company that we're working for. So in the vein of Uber and Yelp, that you're able to rate your car ride from the airport home or the soppy burger that you had at the joint downtown, do you think it would be beneficial to have some kind of third-party rating system out there for customers to review their experiences with agencies or with the travelers themselves?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question, hopefully not go down the rabbit hole of sounding like a statistics program. But I do think it's an interesting concept. I think what you have to and there are some third-party websites that rate agencies as a whole, but the problem with a lot of those is they don't provide meaningful data. And what I mean by that, and this is the problem that you have with it, is you don't have, if you go on some of those third-party websites, it's 20 travelers rating Soliant Health. Well, 20 travelers doesn't tell a whole story about a company. And vice versa, if you, for example, are rating somebody who has come in, rating a sterile processing tech who's come into your facility, completed a 13-week assignment for you, you are just one person rating this one person, and that first rating could destroy you. Or it could inflate you better than what you are because you're not providing enough meaningful data. For a restaurant, you can't tell much from 5 reviews. But if you go to the restaurant that has 5,000 reviews and they're at 4.5 stars, that tells you something, right? And so if you're going to develop a system, you've got to be able to. It's got to be a consensus. It's got to be the go-to marketplace for travelers to rate facilities, facilities to rate travelers, agencies to rate travelers, agencies to rate facilities. You know what I mean? It's a everybody rates everybody marketplace. That is a place where you can provide meaningful data.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought up the traveler rating the facility side of things, because as a leader, one of the things that I try to preach to my travelers that come in, and then also other leaders who utilize that service, is it's a small world in the sterile processing world, but it's an even smaller world in the traveling sterile processing world. They talk to each other, they have relationships, and they know, and their recruiters know, the hospitals that you don't want to be. I don't care how much they're paying. I ain't going to that hospital.
Yep.
And so we just need to be cognizant on the customer side that even though we're paying the bill, a long-term relationship and a long-term reputation with the world of agency staffing is good for us, and especially for facilities who maybe are not as competitive on the bill rate or the pay rate. If travelers know that when they come to your department, they're going to be welcomed, they're going to be onboarded, they're going to be treated as a human being and not as a machine. Those kind of things carry weight, and they can make up the difference between a pay rate.
And I'll tell you this right now, Hank. If some hospital administrators want to scare themselves and not sleep at night, they can jump on Facebook and jump into some of these travel agency groups, and they can see, they can see what people say about certain facilities or certain how do I want to say it? Certain publicly traded companies who own large amounts of facilities, or to say the least, the dissemination of information on social media has become a powerful tool for travelers and for agencies as well, and also for clients. They can find out a lot of information about people they're bringing on through social media. But to your point, there is a reputation being developed by facilities on social media, and all it takes is John Smith, OR nurse, to say, "Hey, I just accepted my first assignment at X hospital. What are y'all's experience?" I see that question all the time on Facebook, and it could range from, "That's a great place, you nailed it on your first assignment," to "Cancel your contract and run for the hills."
That's a risky game too, though, isn't it? Because if the traveler is known on Facebook and is making, not saying that that might not be justified, but their prospects of working at another facility, if facility leaders were looking or lurking in those groups and saw, agency staffers making negative comments about other facilities, would that be a red flag to somebody who's potentially going to hire them as well?
Yeah, I think it depends on the nature of the comment and, how tactful they say, certain things. I could certainly say, "Hey, I didn't have a great experience at that facility. Everybody has their own opinion. I would do some more digging." To me, that's a comment that says, it's a well thought out comment. That person didn't have a great experience. I wouldn't judge somebody based on that comment, but I've certainly seen the opposite. And what you're talking about is the person who, and we all know that person on Facebook who freely speaks their mind on probably too many topics. And that's what it is. You get some of that on there, and people just have to be careful.
You should always represent yourself professionally in writing, because not only social media, but even email. And Hank put a really good post out on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago talking about, remember, every one of those emails is a marketing campaign for you and your department. So choose your words carefully.
Absolutely. And that's a big thing in our group is, because I tell people, don't ever send anything negative over an email to an agency person. Even if you are letting them go and you're saying it in the kindest way, don't do it over email. Have a conversation with them and then follow up with an email recapping your conversation. Because I think, it's amazing what you still see in the news these days, that people make the silliest comments on social media that they get fired for. It's like, did you think through that before you posted that? And there's certainly a lot of that out there, but kind of back to the point of ratings and on Facebook, there is a Facebook group amongst nurses that I saw the other day that literally the only thing the group does is track hospitals that cancel assignments.
Phenomenal. That is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, we've had a lot of shows on big data, Patrick, and how to be able to utilize that. It's too bad that group can't just funnel that into a database, and maybe they do funnel that into a database and share it, but that's really exceptional sort of feet on the ground data tracking. That's really exceptional.
Yeah.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about, really speak to the technicians in the industry that might be considering becoming an agency staffer. So we're going to be right back with Patrick Dotz from Soliant Health. We are back with Patrick Dotz, and in this segment we're going to talk about technicians, or give them some advice, technicians considering becoming an agency staffer. But let's start right at the top. What are the benefits? Because I can tell you, Patrick, I mentioned this in the intro in speaking with Hank, but in my days as a registered nurse and before the family and before I kind of put roots down, I definitely considered becoming a travel agency nurse, and I thought it would be a great way to see the country and, really, you heard earlier I'm from Maine, so I hadn't really been anywhere. So I thought it would be a great way to experience the world, and I never wound up doing it. I don't say I regret it because I like where I got to today, but there was definitely an element of me that thought, why wasn't I braver? Why didn't I go do that? It was something I was interested in, and I think there's definitely part of that we can talk about, but let's start it even before that. What are some of the benefits? So if somebody's looking at this as an option for them, maybe they are braver and they're willing to just get out there and travel even at a young age. What are the benefits of doing that?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest benefits that is not so obvious to everybody is you buy a new car, right? And you get that fresh new smell. The first time you're driving around, you feel like $1 million. You get that new pair of shoes or that nice new shirt. The feeling of something new is really hard to replicate at the job you've been at for 5 years. And when people start traveling, they really get hooked on that feeling of that first day of school feeling. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? And that is something that people really enjoy. It's just different environments, not having the same old Monday. It's something new. And I think if you ask any agency nurse or tech, that's just something that is very appealing to a lot of people. I think some of the other benefits, the obvious one is there's a premium paid to it, and they're paid a premium because they're away from their family. Possibly they're in an unknown environment. It's an unstable. You have 13 weeks, and after that, you don't know what you're doing. That can have a mental toll. But you're paid a premium for that. And the other big one is what you alluded to, is just seeing different areas of the country that you may never explore. And basically you're being paid to travel. So you're being paid to go someplace new like that. And so those are some of the biggest benefits that people see. And sometimes it's just to provide for the family. Some of it's, I just want to go make money and live a good life. And some of it's, I've got to do it because I don't have a choice. I've got to make money I got to make this premium money to provide for my family, whether they're just, and I've had a traveler of mine who's a single mother of three, traveling and, taking on temp assignments to try and make money to make, ends meet. And so there's situations like that as well. I mean, there's all sorts of different reasons why people travel, and it certainly has its benefits.
Yeah, Patrick, in one of our previous episodes, we had a conversation a little bit about how the traveling market actually creates a competitive market for our own technicians, our permanent staffing in our hospitals, to say, okay, guys, we're paying our technicians $10, $11, $12, $13 an hour, and yet these other technicians who are certified, have the same experience, they're making a premium. Now, you made some good distinctions on why in your answer, but I actually appreciate having that competitive force out there of the higher premium pay to say, listen, this job that we're doing, it's important. It is critical for surgical volumes and for quality outcomes. So I'm glad you brought that up as well in your answer. So let's just say I'm sitting here, you convinced me of all the benefits. I want to go out and get paid to see the world. I'm a braver version of a younger Justin, if you will. So I'm sitting in Maine, and I want to go see California. So what should I consider before pulling the trigger to go travel?
That's a great question. And in one of our training classes, we really train our recruiters to dig into the why. I think that's probably one of the more important reasons is, why are you doing this? If you don't have a strong reason to do it, it's going to be hard for you to fight through the adversity that you're eventually going to have. And what I mean by that is, you are, let's say you're a sterile processing tech and you're working at your local hospital, and they bring in an agency person, and what you're going to hear from that agency person is, yeah, I make all this great money, I get to travel to new places. You're going to hear all the roses, right? What you're not going to hear is, yeah, while I was finishing up my job, working 40 hours a week, I was spending 20 hours a week going through the credentialing process and having to get drug screened and having to get medical records updated. And then I was taking all these online competency tests. They were asking me for a skills checklist. They were asking me to update my resume. And then when they found me a job, I had to go find some housing to go live in. And then I had to figure out how I was going to relocate. I had to figure out what I was going to do with my dog. And it's hard. It's not easy. I give these folks a lot of credit for pulling the trigger, because it's not easy. So if you don't have a strong reason behind doing it and some grit, you're going to run into some adversity. There is not a traveler out there who doesn't run into adversity. And so you've got to have a strong reason for doing what you're doing. That, I think, is one of the most important but underrated things that people need to look for when they're going to go take a travel assignment.
You know, what's interesting in your conversation about the why, that also has a lot to do with the where. If you're in it for the money, then perhaps the contract in Alaska, that's where the money's at. That's where you want to go. That's where you end up. But if you're in it to see some parts of the world, they can drive maybe some of that geographical decision as well.
Yeah, that's a huge one. So one of the reasons, a big why for people is, I need to be in Jackson, Mississippi, because I've got a grandmother who's getting old and I want to be around her for a little while. That's a powerful why. If you find a job in Jackson, Mississippi, that person's going to be interested in going, right? That's a powerful why. And that's what really we want people to, that's what we want the recruiter and the nurse and the technician to be on the same page about. So don't be shy about sharing that with your recruiter. Letting them know why you're doing this. What is your compelling reason? And that may be because you need to make money to support your family. That could be you want to be near your boyfriend in Seattle. There's all sorts of different reasons that we hear. But if you communicate that, it's going to help your recruiter find that perfect job for you.
Well, it's about being in alignment, right? I mean, you're really talking about aligning what the traveler wants with what the customer wants, and that's why it's similar with the expectations that we talked about in the previous segment, where you set those, you reinforce them, and that really should, by doing that, solve a lot of the need to coach somebody through it. It would be the same negative sort of consequence that if somebody took the assignment without lining it up with why they're doing it, you probably, from the agency perspective, end up coaching somebody through their assignment the other way around.
Absolutely. That's a great point. That word expectations, it's a great way to summarize what, setting expectations for the client and the technician in this case. So I think you're right. And to Hank's point, if you're money hungry, if that's what's driving you, that's a good reason. It's a great reason. But you've got to be realistic about that too. What they're not going to do is, what you're not going to find is you're not going to go live in Austin, Texas and make the most money.
Yeah, you're not, because they know it's a destination. Absolutely. That's the competition piece as well. Let me flip the script a little bit from the previous question too and say, all right, so now we've said now we've asked the question, what do they need to consider before they travel? But what about when they're looking for a recruiter or a staffing agency? Now they've set their mind to it. They've got it sort of aligned, like I'm willing to make these moves, and they've figured out why they want to do it, or at least they've considered it as an option. When they're looking for somebody that's going to help them then be placed, what should they be looking for in the recruiter or the agency themselves?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I would say, and this is sort of in line with what should they consider, I would say seek a referral. And really, there's a lot of online resources for you to go and like on Facebook or social media, or people that you meet in your workplace and say, who did you use? What recruiter have you had a good experience with? Because it truly is about the recruiter. And we try to tell people that at Soliant all the time is that Johnny SLP or Johnny OR nurse or Johnny sterile processing tech is not signing up to work with Soliant Health. They're signing up to work with Patrick Dots LLC. You are the person who's going to determine the type of experience they have. So when you're really signing up with a person, it's always good to seek referrals. It's always good to find out from a friend or a coworker, who did they trust in this experience? Because it really does come down to trust. I'd love to tell you that every single recruiter in the healthcare industry is always looking out for their travelers. That's their number one. But just like in any industry, there's people who are looking out for themselves first and foremost. And those type of people just aren't going to put your best interest at heart. They're going to try and put you in an assignment that is going to, get you quickly onboarded and get you there, and then you probably don't hear from them for 6 weeks. That's not what you want in a recruiter. You want a recruiter who's going to help you along in the process, who's going to have an open line of communication, who sets expectations for you in terms of communication, that you can reach. Doesn't mean you want to call them at 3 a.m. and wake them and their kid up because somebody yelled at you on your shift. But at the same time, it's somebody who's going to be able to solve a payroll issue for you. If you're having issues with getting enrolled in your benefits, if you're having issues with the hotel you're staying at or the apartment that you're staying at, those are things that people don't think about that are going to happen when you're a traveler. Things are going to go wrong, and you got to have somebody who's going to have your back. And that's really determined by the recruiter and not necessarily the agency itself.
So what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen new travelers make? And I think you sort of alluded to a couple, right? There's probably some mistakes in there, which is why they need a recruiter that's going to have their back and guide them through those. Yeah. And I would bet that one of the other things is they should probably ask the recruiter how many new travelers they've worked with would be another good question to say, and maybe this exact question: what common mistakes do people make? How can I avoid them? And how are you going to help me when I get into it? So why don't you kind of finish that thought and just tell us, maybe a couple of stories, no names involved, but what are some of those common mistakes?
I think you get what you talk about in this regard. And what I mean is, if all you talk about with your recruiter is money, that's all they're going to care about. And so what you're really looking for is don't make the conversation always about money or about the job itself. Try to find out a little bit about your recruiter and make sure they're going to have your back, and make sure that they are not going to be – you don't want them to be a travel agent per se. You want them to be a consultant. One of the things that travelers have always said that they've really enjoyed about me is I will tell them, I don't want to send you to that hospital. I have had travelers that have gone there in the past that have had a bad experience. And I think people one of the common mistakes new travelers make is again, they just don't invest the time to make sure that the person they're working with they can trust. Another big mistake I think they make is they just underestimate the process. And that's I apply for a job online, or I get a referral, I reach out to the agency person. At that point, you have maybe a 20 to 30 minute conversation. At that point, things can move very quickly. I've had it where I've talked to somebody for the first time and I have a job offer for them 4 hours later to move across the country. And that is crazy fast. And so I think, again, one of the biggest mistakes is you've got to set the expectation in terms of your timeline and what that looks like. But I could talk to you on the phone for 20 minutes, and right away I'm going to need your resume. I'm going to need you to send me a skills checklist. I'm going to need you to send me 3 references that I can call. I'm going to take that information. I'm going to build a profile for you. And then I'm going to start calling you and talking to you about jobs. I'm going to start talking to you about comp packages. And we're going to start talking about certain areas. And then I'm going to submit you for interviews. And so you got to be available for interviews. And then if you get offered a job, you've got to take a drug screen. You've got to fill out a 20-page contract for when you come on board for the first time. There is a huge time commitment involved. And I think a common mistake people make is they try to move too quickly on that. There is nothing wrong with taking your time and making sure you have your ducks in a row. Because if you try to move too quickly, you'll hit some adversity and you'll have a freak out moment, and that's when people go dark.
Nobody gets married a month after they meet. Although I will make one exception to that. I will make one exception to that. My parents actually did, and they're still together. I have no idea how, but I thought I would throw that out there because that's usually the case, right? You take your time, or you're going to have to do a lot of work to make it work. And I think that's what you're saying. Yeah. Set the time frame. New travelers need to take their time so that they don't find themselves in too many unexpected situations. Almost like that first year in college. Yeah. Think about how many kids end up going home. This isn't what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be easy. Yeah. I skated through high school and got awesome grades, and I didn't have to work for it. And now I actually have to really work, and I'm also alone, and there's all kinds of new people around, and maybe I don't fit in socially the same way I did where I came from, and the environment's changed. So I think those are all maybe different analogies of situations that somebody might be faced with being a traveler, especially a new traveler who's a rookie.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things we see is, and again, this goes back to setting expectations in the interview, is somebody on their first assignment gets too hung up on, well, my hospital did it this way, so I'm going to do it this way when I'm here. Instead of adapting themselves to the way that hospital does things, they just go, well, that's not right because we did it this way at my hospital, and that's the right way. And, there are obviously legitimate cases where it's like, that's a patient safety concern. The traveler's right. We really should listen to him. And then it's just no, that's not how you clock in and out. That's not what, that's not how you do this. That's one thing we run into is just and that's why some hospitals won't take first-time travelers because they know that they don't know that adaptation phase very well. And,
you almost want to call it the parachute rate, right? Because they're just going to hit the ejector button and then try to parachute their way out of the assignment. I could see that happening for sure. And I also think we could do like an entire show just about vetting the skills and traits of any employee, whether they're an agency staffer or they're a direct hire by the organization. You're looking for flexibility, and that we might bring you back on for a show like that. I know we've come close to the end of our time, and I don't want to cut it off too quick, but Patrick, just thank you so much for coming on the show and talking with Hank and I and giving your insights, because there are a lot of parallel conversations. We're going to do future shows. Definitely just staffing and hiring in general, I think will definitely be a topic, and we can bring you back on for that one as well.
Absolutely. If you guys in the meantime solve the hiring problem and what makes somebody a good worker, we'll probably pay you a hefty salary to come work at Soliant if you can tell us the trade secret.
All right. Well, I'm definitely going to start working on that right away. But maybe you can put a number to that. No.
That's right. That's right, listeners. Y'all heard it here first.
Yeah, if you can solve that mystery, you don't come work for Soliant. You can be a consultant for every Fortune 500 company out there.
There you go. All right, everybody. Patrick Dotz, Division Director at Soliant Health. And Hank, really good, insightful interview, not necessarily along the same topics that we've already discussed to date on Beyond Clean. And I think that was kind of refreshing, especially I think one thing that's really stuck out in all the interviews we've done is that there's always sort of a life theme that it's true in all walks of your life, and specifically in this one was expectation setting. It really doesn't matter if you're talking about agency staffing, direct hire, your own home life. It always is about setting reasonable and attainable expectations. It's kind of that whole SMART goal setting. You know, that's the reason for that, is to sort of lay out the parameters, make sure everybody's on the same page, get alignment, and with that, you can have a successful partnership, no matter if it's business, personal, etc.
That's right. And I loved how he highlighted that expectation is not just for the traveler coming in, but it's also for the traveler before he even starts traveling, for the facility before they even make the phone call to get in those reinforcements. Everybody has to be on the same song sheet and singing the same song before the music starts. And he did a great job just highlighting specific instances where you need to make sure, if it's culture or even if it's all the way down to the process, this is how you clock in. Those expectations have to be set very early on.
Which ties directly to his point about making sure that anybody considering doing this was very clear on their why, and then lines up their assignment to meet sort of their own personal expectations for it. The other thing that was really cool was the weight or having a rating system, and really what he thought would make it successful was that everybody should be able to rate everyone else. Facilities rating travelers, travelers rating the companies and the facilities, so that it's really an open source rating system, because the volume or the number of ratings, over thousands of ratings, is what will really wind up giving that rating system weight in terms of validity.
That's exactly right. And even without that system, I want to encourage the leaders out there who listen to this show. Your recommendation and your follow-up does matter for these travelers, especially the ones who are early on in their traveling career. If you're able to give them a 5-star rating or just a good recommendation to send them on to the next facility, that can mean a lot in order to get them going to open up the next door for their opportunities. So he did a very good job explaining the importance of that.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's show of Beyond Clean, and a big thanks to Patrick Dotz from Soliant Health for joining us. As a reminder, you can help support the show by subscribing to Beyond Clean on iTunes and Stitcher. We'd appreciate a rating and a review, because your feedback, especially in the early going, is very important to us, and we want to make sure that we are having the right guests and the right topics that interest you, our listenership. Thank you again for listening to another edition of Beyond Clean.